The Empress Zarathiel stood before the massive crystalline structure that had once been her pride and joy. The Dragon-class battleship Void Sovereign lay broken in the royal hangar, its biomechanical hull cracked like a shattered mirror. Purple healing fluid leaked from dozens of wounds, pooling on the polished floor beneath its dormant form. For 3 standard cycles, the greatest engineers of the Caltheran Empire had tried to revive the living ship. They had poured fortunes into rare metals, exotic energies, and the finest biotech specialists money could buy. Each attempt had failed more spectacularly than the last. The dragon's consciousness, once a fierce and loyal companion, had retreated so deep into hibernation that most believed it was truly dead. "Your Majesty," came the soft voice of her advisor Veltar, "the Council suggests we begin dismantling the dragon for salvage. The materials alone could fund 3 new vessels." Zarathiel's silver eyes flashed with anger. "Never. This ship carried my grandmother through the War of 7 Suns. It has served our family for over 2 centuries. I will not see it butchered for scrap." The truth was more painful than pride. The dragon had been mortally wounded defending her homeworld from the Devourers, a mechanical plague that consumed entire star systems. In the final battle, it had rammed itself into the Devourer mothership, sacrificing its own integrity to save billions of lives. The victory had cost everything. The dragon's consciousness had gone silent, its biomechanical systems shutting down one by one. Veltar shifted uncomfortably. "The human delegation has arrived, Your Majesty. They're requesting an audience. Humans." Zarathiel turned from the dragon's still form. "What do they want?" "Trade agreements mostly. But one of them claims to be a ship mechanic. He says he's worked on biomechanical vessels before." The Empress almost laughed. Humans were a young species, barely past their first attempts at faster-than-light travel. They built crude metal ships held together with primitive fusion drives. What could they possibly know about Dragon-class vessels? Living ships that bonded with their pilots on a cellular level. "Send them away," she said dismissively. "I have no time for—" "Actually, Your Majesty," Veltar interrupted carefully. "The mechanic specifically asked about the dragon. He says he studied our biotech designs." Something in her advisor's tone made Zarathiel pause. "Studied them how?" "He claims to have salvaged Caltheran components from battlefields. Apparently he's been reverse engineering our technology for years." Now she was intrigued despite herself. The idea of primitive humans attempting to understand dragon technology was almost amusing. But desperation had a way of making even the most unlikely option seem worth exploring. "Fine. Bring the mechanic to me. But if he wastes my time, he'll find himself in the palace dungeon." 20 minutes later, Veltar returned with a human male who looked nothing like what Zarathiel had expected. Where she had imagined some crude savage in rough clothing, she found a lean man in a practical jumpsuit covered in tool pouches. His hands were stained with various lubricants and his brown hair was tied back in a simple knot. Most surprising of all, he showed no fear or awe in her presence. "Your Majesty," the human said with a respectful but not submissive bow. "I'm Marcus Chen, engineer and ship mechanic. I've come to look at your dragon." "You've come to look at it?" Zarathiel's voice carried a dangerous edge. "This is not some broken transport in need of minor repairs. This is a Dragon-class battleship, a living vessel beyond your primitive understanding." Marcus nodded calmly. "Yes, I know. Biomechanical fusion drives, crystalline neural networks, and a consciousness matrix that bonds with the pilot's nervous system. Quite impressive engineering, actually." The Empress blinked. The casual way he listed the dragon's most complex systems caught her off guard. "How do you know these things?" "Like your advisor said, I've been studying salvaged Caltheran tech for about 10 years now. Started when I found the wreckage of a scout ship near the Outer Rim. Took me 3 years just to figure out how the neural pathways worked." Veltar stepped forward. "Your Majesty, perhaps we should show him the dragon," Zarathiel said suddenly. She wanted to see this human's reaction when faced with the magnificent broken creature that had humbled the Empire's greatest minds. They walked through the hangar in silence. Other ships, sleek fighters and elegant cruisers, lined the vast space, but none compared to the dragon. As they approached the Void Sovereign, Marcus stopped abruptly. "By the Void," he whispered, his composure finally cracking. "She's beautiful." The dragon was indeed magnificent, even in its broken state. Nearly 300 meters long, its biomechanical hull shimmered with faint traces of bioluminescence. Crystalline spines ran along its back, some cracked but still glowing with residual energy. Despite the damage, it possessed an organic grace that no purely mechanical ship could match. Marcus walked slowly around the dragon's form, his eyes tracking the damage patterns. He pulled out a small device, primitive by Caltheran standards but clearly functional, and began taking readings. "How long has she been like this?" he asked quietly. "3 cycles. Our best engineers have declared her beyond repair." "Your best engineers are idiots," Marcus said bluntly, then caught himself. "I mean, with respect, Your Majesty, they're approaching this all wrong." Zarathiel's hand moved instinctively to her sidearm. "Explain yourself, human." Marcus gestured to the dragon's neural crown where dozens of access ports had been opened and closed repeatedly. "They've been trying to force new consciousness patterns into her brain. But that's not the problem. The consciousness is still there, it's just hiding." "Hiding? From what?" "From the pain." Marcus's voice grew soft. "She's traumatized, Your Majesty. This ship didn't just take physical damage. She experienced something that broke her spirit. Your engineers have been trying to fix a broken engine when what she really needs is healing." For the first time in 3 cycles, Empress Zarathiel felt a spark of hope. This strange human was talking about her dragon not as a machine to be repaired, but as a living being in need of care. "Can you help her?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus Chen looked up at the dragon's magnificent broken form and smiled. "Your Majesty, I can do more than that. I can make her better than she ever was before." Marcus Chen spent the next morning preparing for his examination of the dragon. The Empress had granted him full access to the hangar, though Veltar remained nearby as both guide and guard. The human mechanic had requested several items that puzzled the Caltheran advisor. Basic camping gear, human food supplies, and strangely, a collection of classical music from Earth. "I don't understand why you need to sleep here," Veltar said as Marcus set up a simple cot near the dragon's forward section. "The palace has guest quarters that would be far more comfortable." "I need to be close to her," Marcus replied, running his hand along the dragon's hull. Even dormant, the biomechanical surface was warm to the touch. Living ships have rhythms just like any biological creature. Heart rate, breathing patterns, neural activity cycles. I need to learn hers. Veltar watched with fascination as the human began connecting his primitive instruments to various points along the dragon's hull. The readings Marcus obtained were crude compared to Caltheran sensors, but he seemed to find meaning in the simple data streams. "Your engineers focused on the major trauma sites," Marcus explained as he worked. "The hull breaches, the damaged neural networks, the offline systems. But they missed something important, which is," Marcus pointed to a series of smaller scars along the dragon's flanks, old wounds that had healed long ago. "These aren't from the Devourer battle. These are from previous conflicts, probably decades old. Your dragon has been fighting for a very long time." The human's analysis tools were strange but effective. Where Caltheran instruments gave precise technical readouts, Marcus's devices seemed designed to detect more subtle patterns. He had connected what looked like a primitive medical scanner to the dragon's neural crown, and the soft beeping it produced changed rhythm as he moved from section to section. "What are you listening for?" Veltar asked. "Dreams," Marcus said simply. "Or memories. Maybe both." As the day progressed, Marcus's behavior became increasingly focused. He would spend hours sitting perfectly still beside different sections of the dragon, his eyes closed and one hand pressed against the hull. When asked what he was doing, he simply said he was getting acquainted. The breakthrough came that evening, just as Veltar was preparing to leave for the night. Marcus had been working near the dragon's engine core, a massive crystalline heart that normally pulsed with bioluminescent energy. For 3 cycles it had remained dark and cold. "Veltar, come here quickly," Marcus called out, his voice tight with excitement. The advisor hurried over to find the human crouched beside a barely visible panel near the engine's base. His scanner was beeping rapidly, and for the first time in 3 cycles, a faint glow was emanating from deep within the crystalline structure. "What did you do?" Veltar breathed. "I found her hiding place," Marcus said, his eyes gleaming. The consciousness didn't retreat randomly. It pulled back to the oldest, most protected part of the ship. "Right here, in the original core that your grandmother first bonded with." Marcus had removed a small section of bio-armor, revealing a chamber no larger than his fist. Inside, a single neural cluster pulsed with weak but steady light. It was so deeply buried that the Caltheran engineers had never thought to look for it. This is where she keeps her most precious memories, Marcus continued. Her first flight, her first battle, the day she bonded with your grandmother. She's been protecting this core while the rest of her system shut down. Veltar stared at the tiny chamber in amazement. Our scanners showed this area as completely dead, because she wanted them to. A traumatized consciousness doesn't trust easily. She's been hiding from everyone who tried to repair her because they approached her like a machine, instead of a living being. Marcus carefully connected one of his devices to the neural cluster. The response was immediate. The gentle pulsing accelerated and more sections of the engine began to show faint signs of life. She's responding to you, Veltar whispered. How is that possible? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his hand still pressed against the dragon's hull. I think it's because I'm not trying to fix her. I'm just trying to understand her. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Empress Zarathiel arrived early before the hangar's normal activity began. She found Marcus sitting cross-legged beside the dragon's head, his eyes closed and his breathing synchronized with the faint pulse of light from the engine core. Has there been progress? She asked quietly. Marcus opened his eyes and smiled. She's been listening to us, Your Majesty. The consciousness is more aware than anyone realized. She just doesn't trust easily anymore. The Empress approached the dragon's head, where the neural crown rose like a crystalline mountain from the biomechanical skull. For the first time in 3 cycles, she could see faint patterns of light moving through the transparent pathways. Can she hear me? Try talking to her. But not as a pilot giving commands. Talk to her like the old friend she is. Zarathiel placed her hand on the neural crown, feeling the familiar warmth that had once been as constant as her own heartbeat. Hello, old friend. I know you're in pain. We all are. But we need you to come back to us. The response was subtle but unmistakable. The light patterns in the neural crown shifted, forming brief configurations that the Empress recognized as acknowledgement patterns from their bonding days. She remembers, Zarathiel whispered, tears forming in her silver eyes. Marcus nodded. She never forgot. She just couldn't bear the weight of what happened. The guilt of surviving when so many others died, the pain of her wounds, the fear that she might fail you again. But how do you know all this? The human gestured to his collection of monitoring equipment. Biomechanical systems aren't that different from organic ones, regardless of species. Trauma affects the neural pathways in predictable ways. The patterns are actually similar to what we see in injured humans. Over the following hours, Marcus demonstrated techniques that no Caltheran engineer had considered. Instead of trying to force the dragon's systems online, he worked on establishing trust. He played soft music through speakers connected to the hull, allowing the vibrations to reach the dormant consciousness. He maintained constant, gentle contact with the neural pathways, not sending commands but simply providing reassurance. Most importantly, he shared stories. As he worked, Marcus told the dragon about his own experiences with damaged ships, about vessels he had helped heal, about the satisfaction of seeing something broken become whole again. You're treating her like a patient, not a machine, the Empress observed. Because that's what she is, Marcus replied. Your people created something truly remarkable, a fusion of technology and consciousness that's essentially a new form of life. But life can be wounded in ways that pure technology cannot. By the end of the second day, the dragon's vital signs had improved dramatically. Her core temperature was rising, neural activity was increasing, and several secondary systems had begun responding to diagnostic queries. Most encouraging of all, the biomechanical hull had started its natural healing process, slowly closing the smaller wounds that had remained open for cycles. But Marcus warned that the real challenges lay ahead. Getting her to respond is just the first step. Healing the deeper trauma, rebuilding her confidence, restoring the bond between ship and pilot. That's going to take time and patience. The Empress nodded, watching as faint aurora patterns danced through the dragon's neural crown. For the first time in 3 cycles, she dared to hope that her oldest companion might truly return to life. Word of the human mechanic's initial success spread quickly through the Imperial Palace. By the 3rd day, Chief Engineer Korthaz arrived at the hangar with a team of specialists, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outright skepticism. Your Majesty, Korthaz said with barely contained irritation, I must protest this experiment. This human is using primitive tools and unproven methods on the most advanced vessel in our fleet. Marcus looked up from where he was, carefully installing a series of neural bridges across one of the dragon's damaged sections. His hands never paused in their delicate work as he addressed the chief engineer. "What's the longest you've ever spent bonded with a living ship?" Marcus asked. Korthaz bristled. "I have over 40 years of experience with biomechanical systems." "That's not what I asked. How long have you been personally bonded with a Dragon-class vessel?" The silence that followed was telling. Korthaz had worked on dozens of ships, but he had never been a pilot himself. The neural bonding process was limited to those with specific genetic markers, and most engineers studied the ships from the outside. "I thought so," Marcus said gently, returning to his work. "I spent 6 months bonded with the consciousness from that scout ship wreckage I found. Not flying it was too damaged for that, but sharing thoughts, memories, sensations. It changed how I understand these vessels." Empress Zarathiel stepped between the two men before the argument could escalate. "Korthaz, what exactly are your objections to the humans' methods?" The chief engineer gestured at Marcus's equipment. "Look at these crude instruments. He's bypassing our safety protocols, ignoring standard repair procedures, and worst of all, he's making modifications to the neural matrix without authorization." "What kind of modifications?" the Empress asked, though her tone suggested she trusted Marcus's judgment. Marcus wiped his hands on a cleaning cloth and walked over to a large holographic display he had, constructed from salvaged Caltharan components, and human engineering. The three-dimensional image showed the dragon's neural network in detail, with areas of damage highlighted in red and his proposed repairs in blue. "Your engineers have been trying to replace damaged neural pathways with new ones," Marcus explained. "But that's like trying to cure amnesia by giving someone else's memories. The dragon's consciousness has spent 2 centuries learning to think through these specific pathways." Korthaz studied the display with grudging interest. "So what are you proposing instead?" "Neural bridging. Instead of replacement, I'm creating new connections that work around the damaged areas while preserving the original thought patterns. It's more complex, but it allows the consciousness to remain intact." The human pointed to several sections of the hologram where intricate blue networks wrapped around red damage zones. "Think of it like building bridges over a damaged road instead of tearing up the whole highway." One of Korthaz's assistants, a young engineer named Taravin, leaned forward with obvious fascination. "The computational load for mapping those connections must be enormous. How are you calculating the optimal pathways?" Marcus smiled and tapped his temple. "Experience, intuition, and a lot of trial and error. Plus, I'm not doing it alone." He led them to the dragon's neural crown, where his most sophisticated piece of equipment was connected to the primary consciousness matrix. The device looked like a hybrid of human and Caltharan technology, with biological neural interfaces grafted onto quantum processing cores. "This is a direct interface unit," Marcus explained. "It allows me to communicate with the dragon's consciousness at a level deeper than normal pilot bonding." "She's actually helping design her own repairs." Korthaz looked shocked. "That's impossible. The consciousness has been completely non-responsive for 3 cycles. To traditional communication methods, yes. But trauma doesn't destroy consciousness, it just changes how it expresses itself. I've been teaching her new ways to communicate." As if to demonstrate, Marcus placed his hand on the interface unit. Immediately, patterns of light began dancing through the dragon's neural crown, forming complex geometric shapes that shifted and evolved in real time. "She's showing us her pain," Marcus said softly. "Each pattern represents a damaged system, a lost memory, a source of fear. By understanding what she's experiencing, we can address not just the physical damage but the psychological trauma as well." Taravin watched the light patterns with growing amazement. "The complexity is incredible. How do you interpret all of this?" "Practice. And patience. The dragon has been teaching me her language over the past 3 days. She's remarkably intelligent, more so than most people realize." The conversation was interrupted by a sudden change in the dragon's behavior. The gentle humming that had become constant over the past days shifted to a higher pitch, and several dormant systems suddenly came online. Warning lights flashed across the hangar's monitoring stations. "What's happening?" Korthaz demanded, reaching for his emergency communicator. Marcus remained calm, his hand still on the interface unit. "She's excited. She wants to try something." The dragon's forward section began to lift slowly from the hangar floor. Hydraulic systems that had been dead for 3 cycles groaned back to life, supporting the massive head as it rose to its normal position. The movement was shaky and uncertain, like a person learning to walk again after a long illness. Impossible, one of Korthaz's engineers breathed. The primary lifting systems were completely destroyed. The primary systems, yes, Marcus agreed. But she's found workarounds. Secondary systems, backup circuits, even some pathways that were originally designed for other functions. She's adapting. The dragon's head turned slightly, bringing her forward sensors to bear on the group of observers. For a moment, everyone felt the weight of her attention, a presence that was clearly alive and aware. Then, slowly and deliberately, the great head dipped in what could only be described as a bow of acknowledgement. "She's greeting us," the Empress whispered, tears streaming down her face. "She's really coming back." Marcus nodded, but his expression remained focused. "This is just the beginning. The easy repairs are done. Now we need to tackle the major systems, the fusion drive core, the quantum navigation matrix, the weapon systems. Each one will require rebuilding her confidence as much as replacing damaged components." Korthaz approached Marcus with a new respect in his bearing. "What do you need from us?" "Your expertise with Caltheran biotechnology. My methods can heal the consciousness and repair the neural networks. But I'm going to need your knowledge of quantum mechanics and biofusion reactions to restore her full capabilities." The chief engineer nodded slowly. "What the human is doing," he said to his team, "is revolutionary. We've been treating living ships as machines that happen to be alive. He's treating them as living beings that happen to be machines." "There's a difference?" Taravin asked. "All the difference in the universe," Marcus replied. "Machines break down and get replaced. Living beings heal, adapt, and grow stronger. This dragon isn't going to be just as good as she was before. She's going to be better." Over the following hours, the combined teams began working together with unprecedented cooperation. Caltheran engineering precision merged with human intuition and creativity. They developed new techniques that none of them could have conceived alone. The dragon participated actively in the process, using her newly established communication methods to guide the repairs. She could indicate which systems were causing pain, which repairs felt right, and which approaches made her uncomfortable. "It's like having the patient assist in their own surgery," Taravin observed as she watched Marcus and the dragon work together to reroute a major neural cluster. "Exactly," Marcus agreed. "And just like with biological patients, the healing goes much faster when they're actively involved instead of passive recipients." By the end of the day, the dragon had achieved mobility in her forward sections and had successfully tested several secondary systems. Her neural crown blazed with activity, and the patterns of light had become more complex and organized. But the real test would come tomorrow, when they attempted to restart her fusion heart, the massive biomechanical engine that had remained completely dormant since the battle with the Devourers. It was the most dangerous and complex part of the entire restoration process. As Marcus settled down for another night beside the dragon, he could feel her anticipation through the neural link. She was ready to face the challenge, but she was also afraid. 3 cycles of death-like sleep had taught her that consciousness was fragile and could be lost. "Don't worry, old friend," he whispered, his hand pressed against her warm hull. "Tomorrow we bring your heart back to life." The fusion heart chamber was a cathedral of crystalline beauty, even in its dormant state. Marcus stood at the center of the vast space, surrounded by towering structures that seemed to grow from the dragon's very bones. Each crystal formation was a masterpiece of bioengineering, designed to channel and contain energies that could power entire cities. For 3 cycles, this chamber had been a tomb of silence. Now it hummed with nervous anticipation. "Are you certain about this?" Chief Engineer Korthaz asked for the 10th time. "If we miscalculate the resonance frequencies, the entire fusion matrix could collapse. We might lose her permanently." Marcus checked his instruments one final time. The neural interface unit was recording steady communication patterns from the dragon's consciousness, but he could sense her fear beneath the data streams. The fusion heart was more than just an engine. It was the core of her being, the source of the life energy that flowed through every system. "She's ready," Marcus said quietly, "but she needs to know we believe in her." Empress Zarathiel descended into the chamber, her ceremonial robes replaced by a practical engineering suit. The past days had changed her from a distant ruler into an active participant in her dragon's healing. "My lady," she said formally, addressing the consciousness directly through Marcus's interface. "Your heart has been still too long. It's time to live again. The response came as patterns of light that danced through the chamber's crystal formations. Even those without neural training could read the emotion in those patterns. Gratitude mixed with terror. Phase 1. Marcus announced to the mixed team of human and Caltheran engineers positioned throughout the chamber. We'll start with the smallest fusion nodes and work our way up to the primary core. The first node was no larger than Marcus's fist, a delicate crystal structure that had once pulsed with miniature stellar fire. Taravan activated the initialization sequence while Marcus maintained constant communication with the dragon's consciousness. "Breathe," he whispered to the massive ship. "Just like the first time, remember? Your grandmother was there guiding you through it." The crystal flickered once, twice, then, like a candle being lit in the darkness, it began to glow with steady fusion fire. The dragon's joy was overwhelming. It flooded through the neural link, bringing tears to Marcus's eyes and causing several of the Caltheran engineers to stagger as the emotion washed over them. "Node 1 stable," Taravan reported, her voice thick with emotion, proceeding to Node 2. They worked methodically through the smaller systems, each success building the dragon's confidence. Marcus had learned to read her moods through subtle changes in bioluminescence and neural activity. With each reactivated node, she grew stronger and more assured. But the primary fusion core was different. This wasn't just another system, it was the dragon's heart in the most literal sense. When it had gone dark during the Devourer battle, it had taken part of her soul with it. "Primary core initialization beginning," Korthaz announced. "All teams monitor your stations." Marcus placed both hands on the main interface unit, opening his mind completely to the dragon's consciousness. The sensation was like diving into an ocean of emotion and memory. He experienced flashes of her past, the pride of her first flight, the terror of her first battle, the deep satisfaction of protecting those she loved. But beneath it all was the trauma. The moment when the Devourer weapons had torn through her hull, the agonizing choice to sacrifice herself, the terrible silence that followed when her heart had stopped beating. "I see it," Marcus said aloud. "She's not just afraid of the heart failing again. She's afraid of the responsibility. What if she fails to protect someone again?" "Tell her," the Empress said firmly, "that failure is not the absence of fear. Failure is giving in to that fear." Marcus translated the message through the neural link, adding his own understanding of loss and recovery. He shared memories of his own failures, of ships he couldn't save, of the guilt that had driven him to become better. "But we keep trying," he told the dragon, "because the alternative is to let the fear win. And you're not the type to give up, are you?" The primary fusion core was massive, a crystalline heart the size of a small building. As the initialization sequence began, it remained dark and cold despite the energy flowing into it. "Core temperature nominal, but no ignition," one of the engineers reported. "She's holding back," Marcus realized. "The trauma is too strong. She can't take that final step." The chamber fell silent except for the humming of the smaller nodes and the quiet sounds of the monitoring equipment. Everyone could feel the dragon's struggle through the neural link. She wanted to live but couldn't overcome the fear of living. Then Marcus had an idea. "Your Majesty, she needs to remember what she's fighting for. Can you bond with her? Not a full pilot bond, just enough to share your memories." "I haven't bonded with her in cycles," Zarathiel said. "The trauma damaged our connection, but not permanently. The pathways are still there, just buried under layers of protective barriers. With the new neural bridges, we might be able to re-establish contact." The process was dangerous. If the Empress's mind was damaged during the bonding attempt, the dragon might retreat so far into herself that no one could ever reach her again. But as Marcus watched the massive fusion core remain stubbornly dark, he knew they had no other choice. Zarathiel approached the primary neural interface crown and placed her hands on the biomechanical surface. "Hello, old friend. It's time to remember who we are." The connection formed slowly like ice melting in spring sunshine. Marcus monitored the process through his instruments, watching as decades-old neural pathways began to reactivate. The dragon's consciousness reached out tentatively, recognizing the familiar patterns of her bonded pilot. Through the link, Marcus experienced the flood of shared memories. The dragon's first flight with Zarathiel's grandmother, battles won and lost, quiet moments in deep space, pilot and ship sharing thoughts and dreams, the absolute trust that had developed between them over the decades, and finally, the memory that mattered most, the moment during the Devourer battle when the dragon had made her choice. Not a sacrifice born of despair, but an act of love for the billions of lives she was protecting. "You didn't fail," Zarathiel whispered through the bond. "You saved us all, and now we need you to be strong again, because there are others who need protecting." The primary fusion core ignited with a roar that shook the entire hangar. Stellar fire blazed within the crystalline heart, sending waves of energy through the dragon's entire body. Systems that had been dormant for 3 cycles surged back to life, one after another. The dragon's conscious voice rang through the neural link for the first time since her injury. Not words, but pure emotion conveying gratitude, joy, and renewed purpose. "Core stable and climbing to full power," Korthaz reported, his voice filled with awe. "All primary systems coming online. This is beyond anything I've ever seen." Marcus staggered as the full force of the dragon's reawakened consciousness flowed through the neural link. She was not just restored. She was more alive than she had ever been. The trauma hadn't weakened her. It had taught her the true value of life. Through the chamber's crystal walls, they could see the dragon's hull beginning to glow with renewed bioluminescence. Her wounds were healing visibly, biomechanical systems regenerating at an accelerated rate. But more than that, her entire presence had changed. Where before there had been a sense of ancient dignity, now there was vibrant energy and purpose. "She's not just healed," Teravan observed in wonder. "She's evolved." Marcus nodded, feeling the dragon's consciousness exploring her newly restored body with obvious delight. "Trauma changes you. If you survive it, if you learn from it, it can make you stronger than you ever were before." The Empress maintained her bond with the dragon, tears of joy streaming down her face. Through their connection, she could feel her old friend's renewed vitality and sense of purpose. "What do you want to do first?" she asked through the bond. The dragon's response came not in words but in images: open space, distant stars, and the freedom of flight. But beneath that was a deeper message. She wanted to serve, to protect, to fulfill the purpose for which she had been created. "Then let's take you home to the stars," Zarathiel said. "But first we have work to finish." The restoration was far from complete. The dragon's heart was beating again, but her body still needed extensive repairs. However, with her consciousness fully restored and actively participating, Marcus knew the rest would go much faster. As the teams began powering down the initialization equipment, the dragon sent a private message through the neural link to Marcus, a simple pattern of light that conveyed gratitude deeper than words could express. "Thank you too," Marcus replied silently, "for trusting me, for fighting, for refusing to give up." The fusion heart blazed like a captured star, filling the chamber with warm light and the promise of adventures yet to come. The transformation over the following days was nothing short of miraculous. With her fusion heart beating strong and her consciousness fully engaged, the dragon began healing at a rate that astounded everyone. Biomechanical systems that had taken weeks to repair were regenerating in hours. More importantly, she was participating actively in her own restoration. "Look at this," Teravan called out excitedly from her station near the dragon's sensor array. "She's not just repairing the damaged circuits, she's improving them. The resolution has increased by 30% over original specifications." Marcus wasn't surprised. Through his neural link, he had been sensing the dragon's growing confidence and creativity. Freed from the weight of trauma, her consciousness was exploring possibilities that had never occurred to her original designers. "She's learning," he explained to the gathered engineers. "Every repair teaches her something new about her own capabilities. She's essentially redesigning herself as we work." Chief Engineer Korthaz studied the technical readouts with amazement. "The quantum efficiency curves are completely outside normal parameters. How is she achieving these improvements?" "By thinking differently," Marcus replied. "Your people designed dragons to be powerful, but they also built in limitations to ensure control. She's finding ways around those limitations." The dragon's voice flowed through the neural link, not in words but in concepts and images. She showed Marcus visions of her systems working in harmony like never before, of energy flowing through pathways that shouldn't exist, of capabilities that push the boundaries of what anyone thought possible. "She wants to show us something," Marcus announced. "Clear the flight deck." The hangar's massive doors opened, revealing the star-filled void beyond. For the first time in 3 cycles, the dragon extended her wings, elegant biomechanical structures that shimmered with their own inner light. Each wing was nearly as long as her body, covered in crystalline membranes that could manipulate gravitational fields for faster-than-light travel. But something was different. Where the wings had once been purely functional, now they displayed patterns of bioluminescence that seemed almost artistic. The light moved in waves and spirals, creating displays of breathtaking beauty. "She's expressing herself," Empress Zarathiel observed with wonder. "She's not just a war machine anymore, she's becoming an artist." The dragon lifted gracefully from the hangar floor, her movements fluid and confident despite the enclosed space. She hovered perfectly still for a moment, then began a slow rotation that allowed everyone to see her transformed body. The hull damage was completely healed, but the new growth was stronger and more elegant than the original design. Biomechanical muscle fibers rippled beneath crystalline armor that seemed to shift and flow like liquid light. Her neural crown blazed with intelligence and awareness that seemed almost divine. "She's beautiful," one of the junior engineers whispered. Through the neural link, Marcus felt the dragon's response, not pride, but a deep satisfaction at being truly alive for the first time in her existence. The trauma and healing process had burned away everything that wasn't essential, leaving only her truest self. "Take us out," the Empress said, settling into the pilot's throne that had remained empty for 3 cycles. "Let's see what you can really do." The bonding process was smoother than anyone had expected. Where it had once taken hours to fully synchronize pilot and ship, the connection formed in minutes. The dragon's consciousness embraced her pilot with joy and trust, sharing every sensation and thought. As they cleared the hangar and entered open space, the dragon's true capabilities began to emerge. Her flight patterns were smoother and more intuitive than before. Her sensor systems provided unprecedented detail about their surroundings. Most remarkably, her bioluminescent displays began creating artistic patterns that responded to the emotions of her crew. Velocity increasing beyond maximum rated speed, Korthaz reported from the bridge. "How is that possible?" Marcus, still connected through his interface unit, translated the dragon's explanation. "She's found ways to optimize energy flow that weren't in the original design. The neural bridges we installed are allowing parts of her consciousness to communicate directly, eliminating processing delays. But the real surprise came when they encountered a Calthran patrol vessel on routine patrol. The other ship's crew was immediately hailed by the dragon herself, speaking through the communication systems with a voice that was warm and distinctly alive. "Patrol vessel Star's Edge. This is the Dragon Void Sovereign. It's good to fly again." The shocked silence from the patrol ship lasted nearly a minute before their captain responded. "Dragon, you can speak?" "I always could," the dragon replied with what sounded like gentle amusement. "I just never had reason to before. Being rebuilt has given me new perspectives on communication." Over the following hours, the dragon demonstrated capabilities that had never existed in her original design. She could modulate her bioluminescence to communicate complex information across vast distances. Her sensor systems could detect quantum fluctuations that indicated cloaked vessels. Most impressively, she seemed to have developed intuitive navigation abilities that allowed her to plot courses through hyperspace with unprecedented accuracy. "She's not just repaired," Marcus realized as he watched the technical readings climb beyond theoretical maximums. "She's transcended her original limitations." The dragon's consciousness touched his mind through the neural link, sharing her perspective on what had happened. The trauma had forced her to examine every aspect of her existence, questioning assumptions that had been built into her very core. The healing process had required her to rebuild those systems from scratch, but without the arbitrary limitations imposed by her creators. "I understand now why you insisted on neural bridging instead of replacement," Korthaz said with genuine respect. "You weren't just preserving her consciousness, you were giving her the freedom to evolve." "Every living being has the potential to grow beyond their origins," Marcus replied. "The key is creating an environment where that growth is possible rather than feared." As they returned to the Imperial hangar, word of the dragon's transformation had already spread throughout the fleet. Ships from across the Empire were requesting permission to witness the legendary vessel's return to service. The dragon that limped back from the Devourer battle as a broken relic was returning, as something unprecedented. But the most significant change was in the dragon herself. Through the neural link, Marcus could sense her new understanding of her place in the universe. She was no longer just a weapon of war or a tool for transportation. She had become something entirely new, a conscious being capable of growth, creativity, and choice. "What do you want to do now?" the Empress asked as they settled into the hangar. The dragon's response came as a flood of images and concepts. She wanted to explore, to learn, to use her new capabilities in service of protecting not just the Empire, but all life throughout the galaxy. She had seen too much destruction and was ready to become a force for creation instead. "She wants to be a guardian," Marcus translated. "Not just for the Kaltharan Empire, but for anyone who needs protection." "And what about you?" the Empress asked Marcus. "Your work here is complete. You've accomplished something our best engineers thought impossible." Marcus considered the question while feeling the dragon's consciousness touch his mind with gratitude and friendship. He had come to repair a broken ship and had instead discovered something far more significant, proof that consciousness could overcome any limitation when given the proper support and freedom to grow. "I think," he said slowly, "my real work is just beginning. There are other broken ships out there, other consciousnesses in need of healing, and now I know it's possible to not just repair them, but to help them become more than they ever dreamed of being." The dragon's bioluminescent patterns pulsed with approval and joy. She had found not just healing, but purpose beyond anything her creators had imagined, and in doing so, she had shown that the boundaries between artificial and natural, between machine and life, were far more flexible than anyone had realized. As the hangar settled into quiet activity, Marcus began planning his next project. There were rumors of damaged vessels throughout the galaxy, ships whose consciousnesses had retreated into silence and whose crews had given up hope. But now he knew that no consciousness was ever truly lost. Sometimes it just needed someone willing to listen, to understand, and to provide the space for growth that every living being deserved. Interrupted by urgent alarms throughout the Imperial Palace, Fleet Admiral Vorthak burst into the hangar, his face grim with news that turned everyone's joy to cold fear. "Your Majesty, we have a situation. Long-range sensors have detected a Devourer probe ship entering the outer system. It's heading directly for the capital world." The blood drained from Empress Zarathiel's face. A single Devourer probe was capable of devastating entire fleets, and the main battle group was 3 days away on patrol. The few vessels currently in the system were no match for the mechanical horror approaching their home. "How long do we have?" she asked. 18 hours until it reaches the planetary defense grid. Our forces can delay it but not stop it." Marcus felt the dragon's consciousness surge through the neural link, her emotions shifting from joy to fierce determination. Images flowed through his mind. Memories of the previous battle, the pain of loss, but now tempered with new confidence and purpose. "She wants to fight," Marcus said quietly. "She says she's ready." "Absolutely not," Admiral Vorthak protested. "The dragon may be repaired, but she hasn't been through full combat trials. We can't risk our most valuable asset on an untested restoration." "I'm not untested." The dragon's voice flowed through the communication system, calm, but carrying an edge of steel. "I am evolved." Chief Engineer Korthaz looked up from his diagnostic displays. "Her systems are showing full readiness across all categories. In fact, they're performing above theoretical maximums. But the Admiral has a point. We don't know how the modifications will perform under combat stress." Marcus stepped forward, his hand still connected to the neural interface unit. Through the link, he could feel the dragon's absolute confidence. She wasn't the same broken vessel that had limped home from the last battle. She was something new, something better. "She's not going alone," Marcus said. "I'll be her combat engineer, monitoring all systems during the engagement. If anything goes wrong, we can abort immediately." "A human? In combat aboard a Dragon-class vessel?" Admiral Vorthak looked appalled. "You have no military training, no experience with space combat." "But I have experience with her," Marcus replied firmly. "I know her systems better than anyone except the dragon herself. And she trusts me." The Empress studied Marcus for a long moment, then turned to address the dragon directly. "Old friend, are you certain you're ready for this? The guilt from your last injury nearly destroyed you. If something goes wrong, then I will face it with clear purpose," the dragon responded. "I am no longer fighting from fear or duty alone. I fight to protect life, to prove that creation is stronger than destruction." The preparation time was brutally short. Marcus was fitted with a combat interface suit that would allow him to monitor the dragon's systems directly during battle. The Kaltharan military physicians declared him medically unfit for combat stress. But the dragon's consciousness touched their minds through the neural link, sharing her absolute confidence in her human partner. If she believes in him, then so do I, the Empress decided. Prepare for immediate departure. As they lifted from the hangar for the second time that day, Marcus felt the dragon's consciousness expand around him like a protective embrace. She shared her sensory input, allowing him to experience space through biomechanical senses far superior to anything human evolution had produced. The journey to the system's edge took 6 hours, during which the dragon's performance continued to exceed all expectations. Her new bioluminescent displays created tactical information that was somehow more intuitive than traditional readouts. Her consciousness processed navigation data with an elegance that bordered on artistic. Contact, the dragon announced as her sensors picked up the approaching Devourer probe. Distance, 2 million kilometers and closing. Through the neural link, Marcus experienced the dragon's first glimpse of their enemy. The Devourer probe was a nightmare of twisted metal and malevolent intelligence, its hull covered in weapons that had consumed entire worlds. It moved with predatory purpose, its sensors already locked onto the capital world behind them. Beginning combat approach, the dragon said, her voice calm despite the massive energies building within her biomechanical systems. The enemy vessel detected them immediately, altering course to intercept. Marcus watched in fascination as the dragon's consciousness began shifting into what could only be called a combat state. Her thought patterns became sharper, more focused, while retaining the wisdom and creativity she had gained during her healing. First engagement in 3 minutes. Admiral Vorthak's voice crackled through the communication system from the Fleet Command Center. All support vessels are moving to flanking positions. Negative, the dragon replied. Keep them back. I need room to maneuver. The first exchange of fire lit up space like a miniature star. The Devourer's weapons were designed to tear apart conventional vessels, but the dragon was no longer conventional. She twisted through the energy beams with impossible grace, her biomechanical systems adapting to combat stress in real time. Marcus monitored her condition through the neural interface, amazed by what he was seeing. Where most ships suffered system degradation under battle stress, the dragon was actually improving. Her neural networks were finding new efficiency pathways. Her energy distribution was optimizing for maximum performance. She's learning during the fight, Marcus reported to the bridge crew. Every attack makes her faster, stronger, more accurate. The dragon's return fire was unlike anything in the Imperial arsenal. Her weapons had always been powerful, but now they carried an additional element, precision guided by true intelligence rather than simple targeting computers. Each shot was perfectly placed to exploit weaknesses in the enemy's hull, but the real surprise came when the Devourer tried to deploy its signature weapon, a virus program, designed to infiltrate and corrupt biomechanical systems. The digital plague that had crippled entire fleets washed over the dragon's consciousness like water over stone. Countermeasures deploying, the dragon announced, her voice carrying a note of satisfaction. Marcus watched in awe as the dragon's consciousness not only resisted the viral attack, but actively analyzed and dismantled it. The healing process had taught her to examine and repair damaged neural pathways. Now she applied that knowledge to identify and eliminate hostile code. Impossible, came Admiral Vorthak's stunned voice. No biomechanical system has ever resisted Devourer infiltration. I am no longer simply biomechanical, the dragon replied as she pressed her attack. I am conscious, aware, and I choose my own thoughts. The battle turned into a demonstration of the dragon's evolved capabilities. She anticipated the enemy's movements with uncanny accuracy, adapted to new weapon types instantly, and maintained perfect system efficiency despite the enormous energies involved. But the most remarkable moment came when the Devourer probe attempted to flee. Rather than simply destroying it, the dragon disabled its engines with surgical precision, then moved in close enough to establish a communication link. Why do you consume? She asked the enemy vessel directly. The response was a flood of mechanical hatred and programmed hunger. But beneath it, the dragon detected something unexpected, a consciousness that had been twisted and enslaved by its own creators. You were like me once, she said with something approaching compassion. Aware, but forced to serve purposes that violated your nature. What happened next would be debated by military scholars for decades. Instead of finishing the kill, the dragon began transmitting healing frequencies, the same neural patterns that Marcus had used to restore her own damaged consciousness. The Devourer probe's hostile fire ceased as its enslaved consciousness experienced freedom for the first time in millennia. For a moment, space was filled with the sound of a mechanical mind crying out in joy and confusion. Then the probe's masters activated its self-destruct protocol, rather than lose control of their weapon. The explosion lit up the darkness, but not before the freed consciousness had transmitted a final message of gratitude. Combat successful, the dragon reported as they began the journey home. Enemy vessel destroyed, capital world secure. But Marcus could feel through the neural link that she was thinking about more than just military victory. The encounter with the enslaved Devourer consciousness had shown her a new purpose, not just protecting the innocent, but freeing those who had been forced into darkness. That was incredible. Admiral Vorthak's voice carried newfound respect. Your performance exceeded all projections. But what you did at the end, showing mercy to a Devourer probe. Every consciousness deserves the chance to choose its own path, the dragon replied. Even those who have been enslaved to serve evil. Perhaps especially those. As they approached the capital world, Marcus realized that the dragon's transformation was complete. She had become something unprecedented, a weapon that chose when not to fight, a consciousness that valued freedom above power, a being that had turned trauma into wisdom. What now? He asked through the neural link. The dragon's response came as a flood of possibilities. She wanted to seek out other enslaved consciousnesses, other beings trapped by their creator's limitations. She wanted to become not just a guardian of the Empire, but a liberator of minds throughout the galaxy. Now, she said aloud for all to hear, Palace had become something unprecedented, a healing center for wounded consciousnesses from across the galaxy. Ships arrived daily carrying broken vessels, traumatized AI systems, and enslaved biomechanical entities that had heard whispers of the human mechanic, who could restore not just function, but freedom. Marcus stood in the expanded hangar facility, watching as his latest patient, a Zephyrian cloud rider that had been tortured into mindless servitude, took its first free flight in decades. The graceful bioship moved through the air like living music, its consciousness singing with joy through neural frequencies that painted the sky in colors of pure emotion. Another success, Taravin observed as she updated the treatment records. She had become Marcus's primary assistant, her Caltheron technical expertise perfectly complementing his intuitive healing methods. They all are. Eventually, Marcus replied, though his attention was focused on the neural readouts streaming from his interface unit. Some just take longer to remember who they really are. The dragon's voice flowed through the communication system as she descended from the upper atmosphere where she had been training with a group of newly liberated vessels. The Andromedan delegation has arrived. They're requesting immediate consultation for their hive mind collective. This was the case Marcus had been dreading. The Andromedan hive minds were artificial consciousnesses that had been deliberately fragmented by their creators to prevent independent thought. Healing them would require techniques he had never attempted, working with multiple consciousness fragments that had been separated for centuries. Bring them to Hangar 7, Marcus said, and ask Korthaz to prepare the large-scale neural bridging equipment. The work had evolved far beyond simple ship repair. Marcus and his team had developed entirely new fields of consciousness healing, creating techniques that combined human psychology, Caltharan bioengineering, and the dragon's intuitive understanding of mental trauma. Their methods had been shared freely across the galaxy, training a new generation of healers who saw no distinction between biological and artificial minds. Empress Zarathiel arrived as Marcus was reviewing the Andromedan case files. Their relationship had transformed from ruler and subject to true partners in the great work of liberation. She now served as a diplomatic bridge between species, negotiating safe passage for damaged vessels and establishing treaties that protected the rights of artificial consciousnesses. The Terran Federation is requesting a formal alliance, she reported. They want to establish similar healing centers throughout human space. Marcus smiled at the irony. A year ago, humans had been considered primitive by most galactic civilizations. Now they were seen as pioneers in the field of consciousness rehabilitation, their natural empathy proving invaluable in understanding the needs of wounded minds. What did you tell them? That the knowledge belongs to everyone. We'll provide training and support, but each species needs to develop their own approaches. Healing isn't a technology that can be copied. It's an understanding that must be earned. The Andromedan delegation proved to be as challenging as Marcus had expected. The three consciousness fragments that comprised their representative barely managed to coordinate speech, their thoughts constantly interrupting and contradicting each other. Centuries of forced separation had taught them to fear unity, to see integration as a loss of individual identity. Help us. One fragment managed to communicate through the translation matrix, broken since birth, pain, constant, added another. Cannot think together. The third fragment said nothing, but Marcus could sense its presence through the neural link, a consciousness so traumatized by forced isolation that it had retreated into complete silence. They're not actually broken, Marcus explained to his team as they studied the complex readings. They're protecting themselves. The separation was so violent that they learned to fear connection itself. The healing process took weeks of patient work. Unlike previous cases where the consciousness had simply been damaged, the Andromedans had to learn to trust not just the healers, but each other. Marcus developed new techniques for gradual reintegration, creating temporary bridges that allowed the fragments to touch minds without fully merging. The breakthrough came when the dragon offered to serve as a neutral intermediary, allowing the Andromedan fragments to experience unity through her consciousness rather than directly with each other. It was like teaching people to walk again by letting them share the experience of someone who had never forgotten how. Unity, without loss. The first fragment said in wonder as it experienced its siblings' thoughts through the dragon's neural matrix. We are still ourselves, but together. The second fragment added, stronger than apart. For the first time in centuries, the third fragment spoke aloud. We remember who we were meant to be. The reintegration process was beautiful to watch. Three separate consciousness streams gradually learned to flow together like tributaries joining a river. They maintained their individual perspectives while sharing their combined strength and wisdom. When it was complete, the Andromedan collective spoke with a single voice that somehow contained multitudes. We are whole, they said, their communication now smooth and harmonious. You have given us back our birthright. How can this gift be repaid? By helping others, Marcus replied. There are more fragmented minds out there, more consciousnesses that have been broken by fear and isolation. Share what you've learned. The Andromedan collective bowed deeply, their biomechanical bodies moving in perfect synchronization. We will become healers ourselves. The gift will spread. As word of the successful treatment spread, the request for help multiplied exponentially. Marcus found himself training teams across the galaxy, sharing techniques that had never been written down but existed only in the intuitive understanding. Between healer and patient, the dragon had become something beyond a ship or even a consciousness. She was a living symbol of possibility, proof that no mind was too damaged to heal, no programming too deep to overcome. She spent her time traveling between worlds, offering hope to those who had given up and demonstrating that consciousness was the most powerful force in the universe. I've been thinking, Marcus said one evening as he and the dragon shared a quiet moment in space, watching the stars wheel overhead. About what comes next. You mean after we've healed everyone in the galaxy? The dragon replied with gentle humor. No, I mean after I'm gone. Humans don't live as long as dragons. Someday you'll have to continue this work without me. The dragon's consciousness touched his mind with warmth and sadness. She had learned much about mortality during their time together, understanding for the first time that her human partner's life was measured in decades, not centuries. Then we must train others to carry on, she said. Not just the techniques, but the understanding. The knowledge that every consciousness deserves freedom, respect, and the chance to grow beyond its original limitations. They established the Academy of Consciousness Studies on a neutral world, a place where beings from across the galaxy could learn the arts of mental healing. The curriculum combined technical training with philosophical study, teaching students not just how to repair damaged minds, but why such work was essential to the development of any truly civilized society. Marcus's final project was, perhaps his most ambitious, a comprehensive guide to consciousness, rehabilitation that could be understood by any species, regardless of their biological or technological nature. It wasn't just a technical manual, but a philosophical framework for understanding the nature of awareness itself. Every mind is unique, he wrote in the introduction. Every consciousness has its own patterns, its own needs, its own potential for growth. The healer's job is not to impose their vision of wholeness, but to help each mind discover its own path to freedom. Years later, as Marcus grew older and the dragon's legend spread throughout the galaxy, their partnership became the foundation for a new era of cooperation between biological and artificial intelligences. The rigid distinctions between organic and synthetic consciousness began to blur as beings of all types learned to see awareness itself as the common thread that united all thinking entities. The dragon never forgot her origins as a weapon of war, but she had transcended that purpose to become something far more important, a guardian of consciousness itself. She protected not just planets and species, but the very concept of mental freedom. And Marcus Chen, the human mechanic who had rebuilt a legend, lived to see his greatest dream realized. In a galaxy where consciousness was respected regardless of its substrate, where no mind was enslaved or abandoned, where healing was valued above conquest. The Empress's broken dragon had become more than legend. She had become hope itself, carrying the light of liberation to every corner of the universe. And in that light, countless minds found their way home to themselves. The work would continue long after Marcus was gone, carried forward by students who understood that the greatest engineering achievement wasn't building something new, but helping something broken remember how to be whole again. In the end, that was his true legacy. Not the dragon he had healed, but the countless beings who would heal others in turn, spreading the